Top 10 worst US hurricanes in history. And what I'm looking at right now on my picture is terrifying. I can't lie, man. I just know that's going to cause a lot of destruction. And it's a photograph taken from space, which makes it even worse because that means it's absolutely enormous. My name is Adam. Hello, welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are absolutely having a beautiful day today. 75% of the people who watch our channel aren't yet subbed and continue to watch without being subbed. That makes me sad. You can make me happy by subbing.
A natural disaster prone country.
Wait a minute.
You got
Wait, is this is real?
The United States is just a natural
Surely that's
disaster
sped up.
prone country.
Oh my.
You got tornadoes, wildfires, even freaking volcanoes on rare occasions. Can't forget about Mount St. Helens. But out of all the natural disasters, one in particular rises above the rest. Hurricanes are by far the costliest, most destructive, and deadliest natural disasters on record here in the US. Well, at least until the next asteroid impact. And today we're going over the top 10 worst historic hurricanes. We'll be looking at three factors to end deadliest natural disasters on record here in the US. Well, at least until
when was this? Oh, this is a movie. Oh, never mind.
The next asteroid impact. And today we're going over the top 10
What's he doing?
Hurricanes. We'll be looking at three factors to determine these ratings: cost, death toll, and power. And we're starting the list with number 10, the very recent Hurricane Ian that spanned from September 23rd to October 1st in 2022. Hurricane Ian was, at its peak, a Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric pressure of 937 millibars. Peak wind speeds from Ian measured in the 160 mile per hour range. Initially forming over the Caribbean Sea, Hurricane
So that's 160 mile per hour winds from the 23rd of September to the 1st of October. Oh God.
It would make landfall as a Category 3 hurricane over western Cuba on September 27th.
I'm sorry for pausing so quickly. Again, I gotta ask you guys something.
In the 160 mile per hour range. Initially forming...
You see in here, in the circle here, what happens in there? Are you safe in there? Like there's nothing even happening
over
here?
The Caribbean Sea. Hurricane Ian would make landfall as a Category 3...
Like what's happening right here, right now? Nothing? Or everything?
Hurricane over western Cuba on September 27th, where 5 fatalities would occur. After passing over Cuba, Ian would strengthen to a Category 5 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. As it slowly approached the U.S. mainland, the hurricane weakened to a Category 4 right before striking southwest Florida on September 28th. Ian then tore its way all the way across the Florida Peninsula to the Atlantic, where it would then swing back around, striking the coast of South Carolina near the city of Georgetown on September 30th as a much weaker Category 1 hurricane. Overall, Hurricane Ian caused a total of $117 million worth of damage, making it the third costliest hurricane of all time. And while Ian did cause some damage in the Carolinas and in Cuba, we really need to focus on one state in particular, and that is Florida, because it was here that by far the worst damage occurred. The hurricane claimed 161 lives, but 150 of these deaths occurred in Florida alone. The city of Fort Myers and its surrounding suburbs.
What is this? What am I looking at right now? Is this floods? Oh my God, man.
Lee County saw 72 deaths. This high death toll was caused by a variety of factors, one being the 15-foot storm.
How is there a fire? How the hell's that happened? Bro, this whole house is gone. So sorry for pausing so many times. Sometimes I don't want to... I'm stuck in limbo whether to talk over the guy talking or stop him talking so I can talk. I get shouted at either way. Maybe I should just shut up.
Surge that flowed onto Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel Island, and Bonita Springs. The flooding destroyed 52,000 buildings, and it even caused the Sanibel Causeway to collapse, cutting off road access to the island. And it wasn't just the coast of Florida that was heavily affected. Large amounts of rainfall caused major inland flooding, and there were even several tornadoes spawned, particularly in southern Florida near Miami. Due to the significance of the storm, the name Ian has been retired by the World Meteorological Organization. Moving on.
Wait, what? Wait, nobody's allowed to be called Ian anymore? Or is it just storm-wise? You're not allowed to call any more storms Ian. Can someone please confirm to me that the name Ian is allowed in the US?
On to number 9, Hurricane Camille. Forming on August 14th, 1969 and lasting until the 22nd.
Great year.
Camille would peak as a Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric low pressure reading of 900 millibars, making it one of the strongest hurricanes on today's list. This hurricane featured wind speeds near 175 miles per hour. It also featured a very similar path to so many infamous Atlantic hurricanes, forming in the Caribbean Sea and then moving up towards the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. While hurricane formation was slow at first, environmental factors such as a warm environment and moisture over the Gulf of Mexico allowed Camille to quickly strengthen to a strong Category 5 hurricane with wind speeds near 170 miles per hour. Forecasters initially thought that Camille would head towards the east, towards Florida, similar to Ian in the last
just on her
century.
holidays.
However,
Like,
they would be a bit off with their forecast. Here's a chart of the forecasted path. See these lines over here? Those are the forecasted paths of Hurricane Camille. And this line on the far left, that's the path that Hurricane Camille actually took.
Oh dear.
This meant that a lot of people in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana were not properly prepared and were caught off guard when on August 18th, Camille made landfall in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi at its full strength, with the wind speeds around 175 miles per hour.
do you ever think about back in the day, like back in the day, like away hundreds of years ago, when people used to live in like mud huts and shit, and you know, weak wooden homes? How much damage these hurricanes must have done to them? They must have just flattened towns completely, flattened villages, flattened everything back in the day. Obviously, today's buildings are made of a bit more sturdy material, etc., which is why they don't do as much damage to buildings. But like you just said, like what, 50,000 buildings or something got destroyed or damaged? Can you imagine back in the day, though? Fuck!
High winds wrecked the coast of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, destroying thousands of buildings, resulting in the loss of 143 lives in these three states. One urban legend tells about a supposed hurricane party at an apartment in Pass Christian, Mississippi, where 23 attendees died and only one made it out alive.
Jeez.
However, this urban legend has mostly been debunked. There was some good news. Since Camille was traveling at such a fast rate, there was little rainfall on the coast. However, the same could not be said for Virginia. By the time the storm reached Virginia on August 20th, its pace had slowed significantly, leading to huge amounts of rainfall, resulting in massive flooding and landslides in Virginia.
I thought that was
in fact,
lava.
More people died from blunt force trauma caused by the landslides in Virginia than those who were on the coast. Overall, 153 people would perish in Virginia, 123 people in Nelson County alone. 21 of these victims were all from the same family, the Huffmans. Hurricane Camille remains the deadliest natural disaster to ever hit Virginia. 123 people in Nelson County alone. 21 of these victims were all from the same family.
Can you imagine 21 people from your own family dying in that? Holy
Huffmans. Hurricane Camille remains
horrible.
The deadliest natural disaster to ever hit the state of Virginia. Overall, Hurricane Camille claimed 259 lives, and due to this high death toll, the name Camille has been retired by the WMO. Number 8 is one that I'm sure many of us remember quite well, and that is Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Now, while Hurricane Harvey only peaked as a Category 4 hurricane, which is still very strong, the hurricane is tied as the costliest hurricane on record, causing $125 billion worth of damage. The storm that would be
He did not just say 125 billion.
As a Category 4 hurricane, which is still very strong, the hurricane is tied as the costliest hurricane on record, causing $125 billion worth of damage. The storm that would become Harvey first began as a tropical storm near the Lesser Antilles Islands, but would eventually weaken back into a tropical depression.
Hold on here, man. What the hell is it costing 125 billion if fucking 85% of it was over the ocean? It's doing that much damage around here. Surely this is mountains, no?
The Caribbean Sea. It would eventually make landfall over the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, but then suddenly pivot north into the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. These warm waters helped the hurricane to quickly strengthen to a Category 4 strength, with a minimum low pressure reading of 937 millibars. Harvey continued north until it struck the coast of southeast Texas.
The devil's
There's
asshole.
one factor that makes Harvey stick out from the other hurricanes on this list, and that is the insane amount of rain that was dropped on Texas. I mean, holy goodness, the amount of rainfall is ridiculous. Look at this radar imagery. Watch this radar loop of Hurricane Harvey. The hurricane makes landfall over Corpus Christi, and then it just stops. Like, it literally just pauses over Corpus Christi. It's crazy. And then it slowly picks up the pace and slowly moves to the north. Now, specifically look at the precipitation over Houston.
What does that mean?
Oh my word.
What does precipitation mean?
It's insane. 60 inches of rain were recorded in Nederland, Texas. All of this rainfall obviously led to a lot of flooding and hundreds of...
Oh my good God. That is insane.
Of thousands of homes being destroyed. Hurricane Harvey remains the wettest hurricane on record in the U.S. Rain wasn't the only damaging factor of Hurricane Harvey. There were also 22 weak tornadoes throughout the state. Overall, 107 people would tragically
Hurricane
lose their
Katrina's gonna be
lives in
top
the
in it.
US. 103 of these people were in Texas. Hurricane 7 is actually a weak hurricane. To number 7, the weak but significant Category 1 hurricane Agnes. The storm that would become Agnes formed on June 14th, 1972, and dissipated almost 1 month later on July 6th. The path of Agnes is an interesting one. First forming down by the Yucatan Peninsula, Agnes struck western Cuba and Florida as a Category 1 hurricane with wind speeds near 80 miles per hour. While weak, the storm did claim lives in both Cuba and Florida, but the story of Agnes was just beginning. Hurricane Agnes is interesting as while it was a weak hurricane,
Category 1 is the weakest, right? As they get bigger, as they get higher. Yeah, sorry, I don't know why I know that, but I got confused.
it was able to maintain its strength as a tropical storm as it traveled over the United States through
That's number
Georgia,
7.
the Carolinas, and up to New England. In fact, most of the destruction from this hurricane occurred way up in the northeast in Pennsylvania and New York. The destruction was very similar to Hurricane Harvey, as most of it was the result of loads of rainfall and the resulting flooding. Take a look at this rainfall map, and you can easily see which areas were impacted the most. Virginia saw 13 deaths, New York saw 24 deaths, and Pennsylvania saw 50 deaths. Much of the flooding crest records in these regions are still in place today. Some
Just inches. 42 inches of rain.
were over 30 feet, which is crazy.
Holy-
That's like entire buildings swallowed up by water, like under.
That was faked?
Much of the flooding crest records in these regions are still in place today. Some were over 30 feet, which is
What? 30 feet?
crazy. That's like entire buildings swallowed up by water, like under the water and like no roofs peeking out. The flooding was so bad in Maryland that it caused the Gwen Oak amusement park to close its doors forever. Pennsylvania was the most impacted, where
Jesus.
70,000 homes were completely destroyed. Within Pennsylvania, Harrisburg on the Saskatchewan River may have seen the worst damage from the flooding. Some buildings were under 17 feet of water. In fact, one cemetery located at a pretty high elevation flooded, leading to 2,000 caskets floating amongst the waters. Unfortunately, there were also 3 tragic indirect
Hold on, I
deaths
need to
when a
listen to that again.
one cemetery located at a pretty high elevation flooded, leading to 2,000 caskets floating amongst the waters. Unfortunately, there were also 3 tragic indirect deaths when a helicopter filming the flooding in Harrisburg crashed on June 26. Overall, Hurricane Agnes shows that while you may be far away from the tropics, you can still be at risk for tropical storms under certain
That's
conditions.
fucking
Moving on to number
wild.
6, which is another recent hurricane.
You know, I never really thought about that. Like the whole cemetery thing and floods happening and graves rising through the soil and shit because it's so wet and soggy. Where does all the water go? Like he just hold on a minute. I mean, how do they get all this water away? What do they do with it? That's crazy.
which is another recent hurricane. This spot goes to Hurricane Maria in 2017, a Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric pressure reading of 907 millibars. This hurricane featured peak wind speeds of 175 miles per hour. The hurricane originated in the Atlantic, northeast of South America. When it made landfall over the island of Dominica, it was already at its peak strength with wind speeds in the 165 mile per hour range.
I remember this
These
one.
are the highest wind speeds ever recorded on the
Obviously,
island.
I live in Northern Ireland. We got the back end of this. I'm pretty sure it was this one because he showed it going across the Atlantic. I'm pretty sure it was this one. It was Hurricane something. We got the back end of it.
Hurricane originated in the Atlantic, northeast of South America. When it made landfall over the island of Dominica, it was already at its peak strength with wind speeds in the 165 mile per hour range. These are the highest wind speeds ever recorded on the island. 98% of the buildings on the island saw significant damage.
Jesus
Maria dropped large
Christ.
amounts of rainfall, which in turn led to deadly landslides. Overall, 65 would lose their lives in Dominica. Now, Hurricane Maria is a bit different from the rest of the entries on today's list. Technically, this list is about the worst hurricanes to impact the United States. Hurricane Maria wasn't much of a problem for the U.S. mainland, but it had a huge impact on Puerto Rico, which technically is a U.S. territory, even though technically they have their own Olympic team. I found that out like literally yesterday. Anyway, I wasn't originally going to include them on this list, but it was just such a tragic and horrific event that I just had to. Maria claimed 3,059 lives. 2,975 of these deaths occurred in Puerto Rico.
Oh my God.
2,975. Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico on September 20th as a Category 4 hurricane with wind speeds in the 155 mile per hour range. These high winds, along with storm surge, destroyed hundreds of thousands of buildings. The power grid went completely offline, leaving 3.5 million people without electricity. The Doppler radar was even destroyed, and these are built to withstand some pretty strong winds, like 135 mile per hour winds. Hurricane Maria is by far the deadliest hurricane on American soil in recent memory. Number 5, Hurricane Audrey.
Good God.
Hurricane Audrey formed on June 25th and dissipated quickly on June 29th, 1957. While Audrey
This is
only peaked
terrifying,
as a
man.
Category 3 hurricane with max wind speeds in the 125 mile per hour range, she still managed to claim 416 lives over the U.S. mainland. Initially forming over the Bay of Campeche, Audrey slowly crept north and struck one of the U.S.'s most vulnerable hurricane spots, the Gulf of Mexico coast of
That
Texas,
Gulf of Mexico's getting
Louisiana,
battered,
and
man.
Alabama. One thing you may notice from this list is that when hurricanes hit this area, it's almost always catastrophic. Audrey made landfall at the Texas-Louisiana border on June 27th. In Texas, Galveston saw a large amount of the destruction as the storm surge broke through the Galveston seawall, flooding large amounts of the city.
Man's in
One
the
fishing
boat.
ship off the coast with 9 crew members near Galveston capsized, killing all occupants on board. As bad as it was in Texas, the damage was even worse on the Louisiana side of Audrey. Millions of acres were completely flooded, and the town of Cameron was almost completely destroyed.
How do
by a
places like this
15-foot storm
recover, bro?
surge. In fact, the only building left in Cameron was the courthouse. It was in Cameron where the majority of the fatalities occurred. 371 out of the 416 deaths occurred in the
Fucking
city.
hell,
The parish
man.
of Cameron, Louisiana, is a hurricane magnet. In 2005, Hurricane Rita slammed into Cameron, destroying most of the town again. Thankfully, in 2005, pretty much everyone had evacuated. But again, in 2008, Hurricane Ike destroyed 80% of the town. Due to all the hurricanes, Cameron, Louisiana's population dropped 80% between 2000 and 2010. One of the biggest reasons
I'm going to
Audrey
assume
was
that's
so
because
deadly-
nobody wants to live there because it's so vulnerable to hurricanes. Everyone's just like, you know what? Fuck this, man. I don't blame them, bro. I would be out after the first one.
was due to the lack of evacuations. Much blame was put on the Weather Bureau for not properly communicating with on the Gulf Coast. They did warn of the hurricane, but they were just pretty lax about it. This actually all led to the Weather Bureau / United States being sued by residents in these areas in the 1963 case Barty v. United States. The case was unfortunately dismissed.
Of course it was.
Number 4 goes to the 1935 Labor Day Category 5 hurricane that formed on August 29th and dissipated on September 10th. At its peak strength, the Labor Day hurricane featured 185 mile per hour wind gusts with a minimum low pressure reading of 892 millibars, making this hurricane the strongest, most powerful hurricane on record in the U.S. The storm initially formed to the east of the Bahamas. As it headed west towards the Florida Keys, the hurricane quickly intensified to a very powerful Category 5. At this point, it traveled
Good
off the Gulf
God.
Coast of Florida, up through the Panhandle and over Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia, and then finally back out into the Atlantic Ocean, where it would eventually dissipate. The 1935 Labor Day hurricane was not only extremely powerful, but it was also very deadly, claiming 423 lives.
Look
The
at
most
that!
impacted were the Florida Keys, specifically the upper Keys of hurricane was not only extremely powerful,
Look at the
but it was also very deadly, claiming 423
Look at the water, bro. Look at this shit. Fuck.
lives. The most impacted were the Florida Keys, specifically the upper Keys of Long Key and Craig Key, where an 18-foot storm surge swept over the islands and the very southern tip of the Florida Peninsula.
Oh my God,
The town of
man.
Isla Mirada took a direct hit and was completely destroyed. The railroad line connecting the islands to the Florida mainland was also destroyed, preventing aid from responding quickly. Today, situated in Isla Mirada, close to the location of the town's post office at mile marker
the hell's
82
he
East
doing?
on US Highway 1, stands a monument that was created by the Florida Division of the Federal Art Project. This memorial marks the location and burial of the ashes of over 300 victims. Going into the top 3, these storms get much more serious and much more deadly. Starting off with number 3, a hurricane that we are all very familiar with. I'm of course talking about Hurricane Katrina in 2005.
What's
It's
gonna be
probably the
number
most well-known
one?
hurricane event, and for a good reason. It is tied as the costliest hurricane on record, causing $125 billion worth of damage. At its peak, Katrina was a Category 5 major hurricane with wind speeds around 175 miles per hour
Good
and a
Lord,
very low
man.
minimum pressure of 902 millibars. Hurricane Katrina originally formed near the Bahamas on August 23rd. 2 days later, on August 25th, it was strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane just before striking the east coast of Florida. Katrina weakened as it crossed the Florida Peninsula, but once the storm was over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it rapidly strengthened from a Category 3 to a Category 5 hurricane in less than 9 hours. The hurricane then headed towards that really dangerous low-altitude coast of Mississippi and Louisiana. On August 29th, Katrina, now a Category 3 hurricane, slammed into New Orleans and the surrounding Gulf Coast. The high storm surge penetrated the various flood protection barriers, flooding 80% of the city. The devastation can clearly be seen on Google Earth. The story of Katrina is really about the failures of the New Orleans flood walls. Like, look at these levee breaches on Google Earth. This barge right here smashed into this levee, destroying it, flooding the entire neighborhood. There were flooded interstates, Walmarts had been flooded, the Superdome was heavily damaged, and there's a lot of drama around the Superdome. I want to eventually do like a Google Earth video on Hurricane Katrina, kind of like my old school video, just going over the damage and the recovery. So stay tuned for that. Overall, 1,800 plus lost their lives from Katrina, and 1,577 people lost their lives in Louisiana alone. That's a huge amount. A death toll on the US mainland like this has not been seen since the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane. Speaking of the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane, that is number 2 on today's list. Estimated wind speeds between 160 and 170 miles per hour. This hurricane had a minimum low pressure reading of 928 millibars. This monster hurricane formed on September 6th off the coast of West Africa.
I'm sorry, it made its way the entire way across here and ended up near Canada. Holy
way further away than any of the other previous entries. You might be wondering, how on earth were we able to track a hurricane in 1928? Well, it's because there were ships throughout the Atlantic that tracked the storm's progress. As the storm crossed the Atlantic and approached the Lesser Antilles Islands, it rapidly strengthened to what would be a modern-day Category 4 hurricane. The hurricane swung north and struck Puerto Rico, where a wind station measured 200-mile-per-hour winds. However, this rating is disputed and it's believed to be inaccurate, but still, obviously there were high winds, regardless. The hurricane continued north over the Bahamas, where it would eventually make landfall in southeast Florida near West Palm Beach as a Category 4. The hurricane would then travel inland and slowly weaken as it struck the communities around Lake Okeechobee. Now in the Caribbean and the Bahamas, the hurricane claimed 1,600 lives. But in Florida, in the US, the hurricane claimed 2,511 lives, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters on record for the United States. 2,500 of these deaths all occurred in Florida. Storm surge mixed with high winds destroyed thousands of buildings near the coast, specifically near Miami. But the majority of the fatalities came from the heavily populated southern portion of Lake Okeechobee, where the lake's dike collapsed. It's estimated that at least 1,800 lives were lost from the resulting flooding. Unfortunately, there are also major racial issues in connection to the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane. Many of the victims were black migrant farm workers and did not receive proper burials or even recognition. However, thankfully, they would eventually be recognized thanks to people like Robert Hazard, who helped establish proper memorials, as well as African-American writer Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, a novel exploring the hurricane's impact on black migrant workers. Before we get to number 1, a couple of honorable mentions. There's the 1899 Puerto Rico hurricane that resulted in 3,885 deaths. There's Hurricane Sandy in 2012 with 254 deaths, 150 of these being in the U.S. This was number 11 on my list. What the hell's going to be number 1? It was actually number 10 for half of the time I was editing this video, but I kept going back and forth. It just barely missed the top 10. Other honorable mentions include Hurricane Andrew in 1993, Hurricane Irma in 2017.
Andrew was pretty bad, though, wasn't it?
In 2005, the Miami hurricane of 1926, and Hurricane Floyd in 1999. But now, on to number 1. Finally, we have made it to the number 1 worst U.S. hurricane on record.
Oh my God.
The infamous 1900 Galveston hurricane. A tragic storm that claimed somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 lives. At its peak strength, the Galveston hurricane...
How the hell is the number between... so big? Between 6,000 and 12,000. That's a huge fucking gap, man.
936 millibars, with the wind speeds in the 145 mile per hour range. Now, we've seen stronger hurricanes, but the damage caused by this hurricane is ridiculous.
Oh my
the storm
Lord,
remained
man.
relatively weak as it passed over the Lesser Antilles Islands and Cuba. But like so many other hurricanes, it rapidly strengthened.
This is what I meant when I said about, like, back in the day, hurricanes would do so much more damage and shit.
Over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. From there, it would strengthen to what would be a modern-day Category 4 hurricane, and then smash into the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana.
Still huge.
This same area that we've talked about so much in this video. This is not a good area. Do not live in this area of the U.S. The hurricane continued inland and even remained a tropical storm all the way up till Iowa on September 12th. As you could probably guess from the name, the island city of Galveston, Texas was the worst hit by the hurricane. A 12-foot storm surge swept over the city, flooding it completely, destroying 7,000 buildings. It's worth noting that the highest point in Galveston in 1900 was 9 feet above sea level. So yeah, the entire town was flooded. To make matters worse, the city and much of the Texas coast in general endured 120-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Galveston was supposed to be a huge hub for Texas.
I can never imagine something like this. Like in my head, that picture
was flooded.
right there. Like, look at all this wood, man. I can never imagine, like, in my own head, seeing that much damage and that much destruction, because I've never seen it in real life. You know, the only time I'd ever see this is through photographs, videos like this. So it's just hard to really imagine seeing it in real life.
The city and much of the Texas coast in general endured
it would seem like it would be surreal.
Wind gusts. Galveston was supposed to be a huge hub for Texas, a large and very important city. However, after the hurricane, many investors decided to take their money to the nearby city of Houston instead. So Houston became the hub for that area of Texas. While the death toll varies, the most common number is around 8,000, making the Galveston hurricane the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history.
That is absolutely insane. 8,000 roughly people dying from a hurricane. It's fucking crazy, man. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that was crazy. Scary, terrifying. I hope to God I never find myself in one. Sending prayers to all these who do. And if you guys are ever living in a spot like this where there's a bad hurricane going on, I hope to God you're okay. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it. Remember to like, subscribe, do all the good stuff. Do something fun today. See you later.